He'd much rather spend the money on food stamps than he would on a strong military or support for our troops.
Former Vice President Dick Cheney yesterday speaking of Commander-in-Chief Barack Obama's decision to reduce troop levels to pre-World War II levels, at least with the United States Army. Joining us right now, Major General Bob Scales, retired U.S. Army Major General, also a Fox News military analyst, and may I say, the very model of a modern Major General. Bob Scales, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So do you agree with Dick Cheney? I mean, you've forgotten more about the U.S. Army than I will ever know. Is this the Commander-in-Chief basically relinquishing his responsibility to keep troop levels to a place to provide for the common defense?
I think what we're seeing is deja vu all over again. In my lifetime, I've seen the Army break 4 times. 4 times. And when I mean break, I mean turn into an institution that's cannot be used to deploy overseas and take on our enemies. And I think this draconian reduction pushes the Army right back down that slide again. And the other services are reduced. And when we come out of a war, we should have the numbers go down a little bit. But when you push the numbers down this dramatically, you do 2 things. You take guys that have got 3, 4, 5 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, you put your arm around their shoulder and say, thanks for almost losing your life, pal. You're on the street and you're a machine gunner. Go find a job. And the second thing you do is you remove from the Army's ranks those soldiers that you need, the close combat soldiers, those guys who are always the first over the beach, the first in the area of operations, who are going to have to carry the heavy load, and they're going to do it in numbers that are reduced dramatically. Now,
all right, can I interrupt you there for a moment? Because I want to ask you about this idea that you hear a lot of people at the Pentagon talking about right now. They say, okay, you know what? We can reduce troops if we replace them with the right kind of troops. In other words, we need more special forces. We need smaller, better trained forces to go into these areas, because that's really how we're going to fight wars in the future. Now, I mean, look, there are times when you just got to have a lot of boots on the ground, but the vast majority of the things that have been on our horizon of late, after we got out of Afghanistan, after we got out of Iraq, were basically things that could be handled perhaps better by special forces. Can you have a smaller, smarter, stronger army?
No. You can have a smaller, weaker army, but you can't. Look, the bottom line is nobody knows what's going to happen next. We're about 0 for 17 in the last 70 years trying to pick out what type of war we're going to fight.
We're always fighting the last one.
And everybody who comes out of, every administration that comes out of war, just before the Army breaks, here's what they say: wow, we're much smarter than that last bunch, and we will never do this again. So therefore, we don't need a lot of soldiers on the ground, and then win. But then you have the enemy, and the enemy has a vote. And if the enemy knows the Army is down to a level that they can't sustain, what's the enemy going to do? He's going to build a force with more troops. And when you find yourself fighting at odds that run from 2, 3, 4, 5 to 1, and the enemy will try to run this war for decades if he can, we're going to see the same thing happen over and over and over again that I've seen happen in virtually every war, with a possible exception of Desert Storm. I've seen happen in every war since Korea.
Our guest is Major General Bob Scales, and as a general in the Army, part of your job is to sort of survey how the world looks right now, or a certain region of the world, and determine exactly what the potential threats are going to be to the United States of America and how you can respond. Well, when you look at the Middle East right now, you look at Iran, you look at Syria, you look at what's going on, you look at Ukraine, you look at Russia, and then you look at China and the threat in the China Sea and how they're warring over territories with Japan and South Korea. Are we equipped right now to meet the current demands, let alone the unknowns, Donald Rumsfeld's famous unknowns?
Well, the short answer is no. Look, anytime you pull back from something, anytime you create a vacuum in the global environment, guess what? Someone steps in to fill it. There's no other NATO or allied nation out there that has a military that's got the ability to do what the United States does. No one can project power like we can. Take away the ability to get these distant, inhospitable places in regions of the world that are in vital national security interests of the United States, and turn some hegemon loose to do whatever he wants to his people or to the region, and pretty soon the American people are going to say, send in the soldiers and the Marines. It happens. Look,
Right.
if it happened once a generation, I would say I've got a little bit of hope. But this happens every time.
All right.
Every time we go to war, fully equipped, fully trained, and far too few numbers to outlast the enemy in some distant fight.
You know, I probably agree with you on one thing, or maybe I don't. I know we'll see where we are on this. The A-10 Warthog.
Oh, my God.
I think this is an amazingly and incredibly effective aircraft. Close ground support is the one thing that you want if you're on the front lines. You want an A-10 coming in on your 6 to protect your backside and to take out the enemy in front of you. It is a devastatingly effective weapon, and we're doing away with it. Do you agree that this is a bad idea?
Look, the ground forces, the Special Forces, Marines, and the Army, there are two aircraft that those forces venerate. One is the AC-130 gunship,
Right.
and the other is the A-10. Those two aircraft get down in the dirt, and they fly and deliver both bombs and cannon within meters of soldiers in contact. They're so well known, not only by our soldiers, but by the enemy. And when the Taliban sees an A-10 show up over, they basically
They run.
And hear an A-10 coming, yeah.
They know the battle is over. There's nothing they can do to win it. Okay,
Explain that old phrase, if you could. Go ugly, go early. Go early ugly, or what? Go early ugly. What is it? It's about the A-10. The first thing you want to do to soften the battlefield is send in the A-10s.
Absolutely.
General Scales, can I ask you one last question? We've got active duty military right now, the people who are wearing the uniform and ready to go make the ultimate sacrifice for our country. They heard about these troop reductions yesterday, and tomorrow they're going to see their commander-in-chief go to Minnesota and ask for tens of millions, billions of dollars in new domestic spending on things that we just can't afford after hearing that their troops and their capabilities are being diminished. What does that do to morale?
I tell you what it does to the morale. About 75% of our active duty soldiers are married with children. You saw Sergeant First Class Remsburg at the President's State of the Union speech. You may recall something that just struck me dead. He's had 10 deployments in 10 years. That's unprecedented. And so now, all of a sudden, some number of Sergeant Remsburgs are going to have to turn to their family and say, I'm out of a job.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do, Daddy? Well, I've been a ranger for the last 14 years, and my head has been damaged severely by a concussion. So maybe I don't know what I'm going to do.
Major General
Just try to play that out a couple of times.
Yeah, I hear you.
Major General Bob Scales, thanks so much for joining us. Always good to have you.
General, always a pleasure.